Hi there, Year 10. Welcome back. I hope you've had a good Easter and a chance to have a bit of a break. Before Easter, we were looking at the scramble for Africa, when the entire African continent was divided up between European powers, including Britain. We looked at the role of Cecil Rhodes in that process and why he's such a controversial figure today. Today, we're going to look at one particular country in Africa and the role that it played in the British Empire and why Britain got involved there in the first place. And that country is Egypt, and the title for today is Why Did Britain Get Involved in Egypt? So Egypt's up there in northeastern Africa. And to understand why Egypt was important to the British when they were building up their empire in the late 19th century, we need to look at a map. So over here in Asia, we've got India, kind of known as the jewel in the crown of the British Empire. The British Raj had been established there in the 1850s, as you know, and it was a huge source of wealth for Britain, both from the economic resources that were taken from India back to Britain, things like tea, gems, saltpeter, calico, but also because India provided a market for British manufactured goods. So millions and millions and millions of people living in India, they could be basically forced to buy products from Britain, such as cloth manufactured in factories in northern England. That could be sold to the people in India and therefore, again, make money for Britain. Now, for that to happen, there needed to be trade and transportation between Britain and India. Ships needed to be able to carry goods from Britain to India and from India back to Britain. And good transport links with India were also really important for military reasons. If you remember the Indian Rebellion of 1857, when that was put down, that was quashed because of the arrival of reinforcements, soldiers who came from Britain. But up until the 1860s, the only way to get from Britain to India, or vice versa, was by boat, and it was around the southern tip of Africa. The Cape of Good Hope, as it's known, the southern tip. So a ship going from, let's say, Southampton in England to Mumbai, then known as Bombay in India, it would take around about 4 to 5 weeks. It was a journey of around about 20,000 kilometres, just under. So that's a long trip. In the 1860s, a bunch of engineers, mainly French with the backing of the Egyptian government, decided to dig a canal called the Suez Canal through this thin sort of land bridge here that separates Africa and Asia. So the Suez Canal was dug here in the 1860s, completed in 1869. Didn't really have anything to do with Britain. As I said, it was French engineers, Egyptian investment that caused this canal to be dug. And from then on, ships could sail through the Mediterranean, through the 164 kilometre long Suez Canal, down there through the Red Sea, and arrive in India. It halved the journey. This time the journey was only 11,000 kilometres, so it almost halved it, and took about 2 and a bit weeks. So a huge boon for the British Empire was the digging of this canal. Troops could be sent more quickly to India if there was any kind of war going on or rebellion, and all of those economic resources could be transferred between the two places a hell of a lot more quickly. So the British loved the Suez Canal. They thought this was great. Not only was it quicker to get to India, of course, by the way, but to other places like Australia or further to the east, Hong Kong and Singapore, also part of the British Empire at that time. Now, as I said, the canal wasn't owned by Britain. It was owned by the Egyptian government. It was actually owned technically by a company, which you could buy shares in. The Egyptian government had most of the shares. And it charged a toll to any ships that went through. So all of the benefits that were being accrued by the British ships going back and forth, they had to lose some of that profit paying to go through the canal. And the British wanted to come up with a way around this. In the 1870s, the British government borrowed £4 million, which in today's money is absolutely astronomical, some billions. They borrowed that amount from a banker called Lionel Rothschild, and they used that to buy shares in the company that controlled the Suez Canal. So that meant Britain had more of a say in the way the canal was run, and they didn't have to pay so many tolls and taxes to go through. Of course, the journey still took 2 and a bit weeks, so it wasn't like you suddenly whipped down there in a couple of hours. It still took 2.5 weeks, so people did still generally stop off in Egypt on their way through. It was always one of the staging posts, one of the stopping off points, coaling stations as they were known, because the ships were coal powered and would have to take on new coal in these various points along the journey. And also people could do things like send letters home, they could go and buy things from local shops as the ship was going through, that kind of thing. And the British decided to start buying shares because the Egyptian government was in a bit of financial difficulties at that time. The British decided to buy shares not just in the canal, but also in things like the Egyptian post office, in the Egyptian railway system. They started gradually just taking more and more of an interest in Egyptian affairs because they were travelling through all the time. Now, a lot of people in Egypt weren't happy with this. They felt like their country was being stealthily taken over by the British. First of all, they ruled our canal. Now they're ruling our railways. Now they're running our post office. It's only a matter of time before they try and take over completely. So a bunch of people in Alexandria, a city in the north of Egypt up here, they staged a protest about British meddling as they saw it. And some British people living in Alexandria were actually killed in that disturbance. The British responded harshly and quickly. They sent the Royal Navy, a destroyer, to go and shell the city of Alexandria. So bombs were fired from the ship into the city, kind of indiscriminately, destroying houses, killing hundreds of people. And then the British Army was sent in, 24,000 soldiers from Britain and about 7,000 soldiers from the Indian Army. And suddenly, Egypt was seized by Britain. The official reason being to protect the British people who were living there from violence, but clearly the British had been waiting for an excuse to come in, take over Egypt, because if they ruled Egypt as part of the British Empire, it would be a lot simpler to use it as a staging post on the way to and from India. Now, following that, Egypt, technically at the time, Egypt ruled over the country of Sudan to the south, and the British then tried to extend their influence further south into Sudan as well. There was an uprising against British rule in Sudan led by a guy called the Mahdi. They killed a famous British general called General Gordon, and Lord Kitchener was sent in the 1880s. He was the guy who you'll know from year 9, the person on the poster, "Your country needs you." He was later an important general in World War I as well. He was sent into the Sudan to take over that area. So in the space of about 20 years, from 1882 till the end of the 1800s, Britain had established control over this huge corner of Africa. And this is why Cecil Rhodes, from down here in the Cape Colony, he had this dream of a Cape to Cairo railway. He thought one day there could be a railway linking Cape Town in South Africa with Cairo, the capital of Egypt, and it would pass through British territory all the way through. So, to summarise, the British control over Egypt, it's mainly linked with India. It's to do with the trade to and from India. It's a strategic location on the way there. It's also to do with imperialism and that idea that Egypt would be better off under British rule, and the British taking over other countries was a good thing. Linking in with the imperialism driven by people like Cecil Rhodes in South Africa, this idea that an unbroken ribbon of British territory from North to South Africa would be a wonderful thing. And also this idea of military conquest and General Kitchener being sent in and people taking pride in British military victories. But really it's all done to exploit the economic resources and the people in India as much as possible. So what I'd like you to do today is, using the video, my explanation there, and the textbook pages I've scanned in, there are a few questions for you to answer. They shouldn't take you too long. Then there are a couple of extension tasks if you finish the questions. The first one is to look at a source, a cartoon from the time, and to think about the comments that might be making about Britain taking over shares in the Suez Canal. And the second extension is to try and research what has happened to the Suez Canal since then. I want you to try and find out, does Britain still control it? If not, who does? And how did Britain's involvement in the Suez Canal end? So those are your tasks for today. A few questions based on the textbook, to look at the source and answer a couple of questions on that. And then finally, if you have time and if you have access to the internet, find out what's happened to the Suez Canal since then. Good luck.